So the Supreme Court has allowed Texas's anti-abortion law to go into effect, and the result has been chaos on Twitter. We're joined now by Briahna Joy Gray, who's been caught up in the Twitter fracas around this. Whenever something goes wrong on the left, the immediate response isn't to organize a response to figure out the way forward. It's to kind of try to figure out who's to blame for this one. So some of the leading supporters of Hillary Clinton have been using the opportunity to come after people who supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 and then either refused to vote for Hillary Clinton in the general election or were lukewarm in their support for her, and are blaming those people for the state that we're in now. So Jill Filipovich was one of the leading critics here. She came after people with this. We can post that. People quickly noted that Jill herself had attacked people in March of 2016 who had been pushing Ruth Bader Ginsburg to retire before Democrats lost the opportunity to replace her. She has said that she was wrong about that, but is complaining that people have not equally confessed their own wrongdoing. So Briahna's here to give her side of this argument. Briahna, I think one important piece of context is, who were you in 2016 and what were you up to?
I was a completely anonymous attorney living in New York City. As you know, Ryan, you're the person who first hired me to my first media job. I hadn't even started writing. I don't think I'd published anything in my life until about spring or summer of 2017. In 2016, I had maybe 1,000 followers on Twitter and was a complete non-entity, but apparently had the incredible power of deciding the outcome of the Supreme Court 5 years later.
Right, and so you did, you supported Jill Stein, but you did so in New York, which Hillary Clinton ended up carrying
heartily.
She did quite well in New York, and so your argument was, look, people aren't going to respond to this Supreme Court case that you're making. Can you explain why you think that wasn't a useful rhetorical argument, even if it was actually true?
Yeah, the tweet that is upsetting so many people was from 2017, and it was in response to an NPR piece that I only vaguely remember at this point. But I recall that the substance was that there were these disgruntled fringe voters. We were hot in the middle of Bernie Bro discourse and about how Bernie Bros were the ones that caused Donald Trump to win. And there was some lamenting about why it was that Bernie Bros wouldn't get on board, and that the Supreme Court composition and the Supreme Court being liberal enough to uphold various rights that are so essential to Democratic voters would ultimately be the thing to use to galvanize otherwise recalcitrant voters. And the point that I was making is that we have seen that does not work, that there is a cohort of voters who are frustrated with being told the Supreme Court is the ultimate trump card every 2 to 4 years. And ultimately in 2016 and going forward from that have started to flex their muscle and say that you actually have to provide something substantive instead of just bullying us and threatening us with the worser outcome, right? And that's not to say that there was a minimization of the consequences of what it would mean to have a conservative Supreme Court. But I was articulating what I observed, which was that frustration had reached a level that voters would no longer be bullied in that way without also being offered substantive policy reform. And in fact, the best way to guarantee a securely liberal Supreme Court, a securely left Supreme Court, would be to meet voters where they are and to offer the basic kind of social safety net programs that Democrats historically didn't used to fight you about on the internet.
So, Briahna, let me ask you, look into a crystal ball for me for a moment. We are walking into potentially a moment in 2024 where perhaps Joe Biden doesn't run again. I think that's a thought that many Democrats have just due to his age. And it's an open race. And I think we can predict the Democratic Party establishment is going to get behind a Vice President Harris or a Pete Buttigieg. Do you think your party has learned its lesson, the Democratic establishment, I should say, within your party, of trying to bulldoze progressives and that has consequences? Do you think that might look different in 2024, or will it be the same effort to box out Bernie Sanders and others?
I think that's a really good question. And if the level of discourse that has been going on since about midnight last night is any indication, I would say there have been absolutely zero lessons learned. Look, there are people, I would never dream to take a moment as grave as last night and use it to dig through someone else's tweets and mock their kind of poor judgment in the past. But someone like Jill Filipovic has chosen to do exactly that at the same time that she wrote an entire article in 2016 saying that it was basically anti-feminist to ask Ruth Bader Ginsburg to drop out when she actually could be replaced by Barack Obama, and at least help us be part of the way to a court that's not so enormously lopsided toward Republicans, right? And I think that this is a part and parcel of an instinct that a lot of liberals have to absolutely refuse to look at their own role, that the role that the Democratic Party played in setting up the blocks to fall exactly as they had. People behave to this day as though talking about the 2016 election being rigged is some fairy tale that's dreamed up by sad Bernie supporters who didn't get their way. When this is something that people like Elizabeth Warren, someone who I know that Jill Filipovic was supportive of, and Donna Brazile have admitted to. This is part of the historical record at this point, right? The idea that they elevated Trump, that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democrats chose to elevate Trump as a Pied Piper candidate, thinking that he was going to be easy to beat, and therefore that he was the Republican they wanted to run against. That Bill Clinton encouraged Donald Trump to run. These are all genuine parts of the historical record that Democrats should be reflecting upon in this moment a lot more than the tweet of an anonymous 2017 poster.
So one other point, and I'm taking kind of an unpopular position from, I think, kind of what the common wisdom is with specific to the Texas abortion law. So I know a lot of Democrats are outraged today that the Supreme Court didn't decide to take it up under the assumption that they would have upheld Roe and they would have overturned the Texas law. I would be of the opinion that it's a very conservative-leaning court, and actually taking up the case probably could have potentially done more to chip away at Roe and, in fact, expand the Texas law nationally. Is there any legitimacy to that?
Well, I was watching some of the commentary last night, including that of Ellie Mistel, who's a frequent mainstream news commentator and a previous editor, I believe, of Above the Law, a very popular legal blog, Harvard attorney. And he was pointing out that a lot of these kinds of rightward shifts are easier to execute in kind of the dark of night, because even conservatives are concerned about the backlash from very openly kind of attacking a policy, a legal precedent that is broadly embraced by Republicans across the aisle, right? I think it's something like, 60 to 70% of Americans support maintaining the right to choose. So sidestepping actual ruling in this way does provide a kind of cover. Letting it expire as opposed to actually ruling against it could be a strategic way to kind of sidestep responsibility for the outcome here, although ultimately it will fall on the court. And so we'll see what happens in the next few days, but there was some conversation about whether a kind of response by activists and kind of, movements in the streets and a lot of noise being made among the people could affect what the Supreme Court ultimately does here. And this provides an opportunity for that kind of activism to germinate and make itself known. There's a history of law and social movements that ask the question, which comes first, the social movement or the law? And historically, it has been the case that the social movements do come first and the law tends to respond. And when it's the other way around, we tend to have controversy and instability around said law, and it tends not to be as concretized for the long term. So I think this is an interesting moment to do a reset, because Roe v. Wade is often described as one of those moments where arguably the law was somewhat premature with respect to where the country was. Obviously, a lot of things have changed since the 1970s, but it is interesting to see what role activists and social movements will play in this moment.
And it does seem like the court's move here could be extremely clever, or maybe almost too clever, because it does seem like what Briahna is saying is right, that what they're trying to do here is not have a ruling that leads to a headline that says Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. Instead, what they seem to want to allow to happen is a bunch of states to pass laws that are in obvious and clear violation of Roe, and then the Supreme Court just doesn't hear them. And then so then more states do it, and eventually you've got half the country or more that has passed these laws that are in violation of Roe. Supreme Court hasn't heard any of them, and then courts lower down then just absorb the reality that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe without overturning it, and they hope that they can kind of boil the frog very slowly so that they don't get people out into the streets. I don't know if it's going to work or not. I think it'll depend on how the media covers this and whether people are paying a close enough attention to it.
Yeah, it's certainly a very animating issue for both sides, so I think that's accurate. Briahna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.
And more Rising up next. Stay with us.